Okay, so we are in conference mode now. I would like to thank all of you for joining this afternoon. I am honored to introduce our guest speaker, Caroline Ceniza-Levine, who will be talking about negotiation of what you're worth. Caroline is an amazing career and business expert. She is an author. She is a speaker that speaks all throughout the media. She is the co-founder of Six Figures Start. For more information on Six Figure Start, you can go to www.sixfiguresstart.com. Caroline has also been seen on CNN, CBNC, Money Watch, also CNBC, and also Fox News Career Accelerator. She's an amazing person that I think is going to bring a lot of empowerment on negotiation today. So without further ado, I would like to turn this over to Caroline. Caroline, are you up? Caroline, try your mute.
Hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay, great. So
let me get to your hold on.
Presentation up. Yeah.
Yeah. Shoot.
Great. So am I going? So do I have the reins to move this around?
You should.
Okay, great. Okay, so thanks so much, Regina, for the introduction and for having me on your webinar series. This is really exciting. Negotiation is such an important topic for everyone, really, and especially for women who tend not to negotiate. And if you think of something like salary negotiation, if you don't negotiate from the beginning, your lower salary just compounds over time because a lot of your salary increases are based on an adjustment on your current salary. So if your first salary is lower than someone else's because you didn't negotiate, that mistake just compounds going forward. So hopefully we can learn some strategies to prevent that from here on out. And so I actually flip this, and we are going to take questions at the end, but I encourage folks, because we do have a chat screen, to ask your questions now in terms of typing them into the chat. It's something that this way, when we get to the questions, there'll be a queue of questions to begin with. And I think it's also helpful as you're listening to really remind yourself, why did you sign up for this webinar? Why did you come to this webinar? What is one thing that you're hoping to get out of it? And hopefully I'll cover that as we go through negotiation. But again, we'll have the Q&A, and this way we can get started. So as you think about your question to type in, I just wanted to introduce the agenda. So we're going to talk about an overview of negotiation. We're going to talk about a three-part framework for negotiation, because too often people think of it as one point in time. I'm sitting in a meeting with my boss and I'm negotiating a raise, or I'm sitting in a meeting with a prospective employer and I'm negotiating an offer, or I'm sitting with my spouse and I'm negotiating responsibilities, or I don't know, whatever, where we're going to be going out this weekend. So it can be a lot of different things, but people think of negotiation as one point in time, and I'm going to share a three-part framework because it's not one point in time. It's actually, at a minimum, it's 3 steps, and often it's more than that. And then we're going to talk about 7 steps to prepare for negotiation, for a successful negotiation, and then I'll give you some ideas on how to walk away and practice some of the things that we're talking about today. So as Regina mentioned, I'm in the media a lot. I've authored 2 books, and I just wanted to put my picture there so that you could feel like I was talking to you. So, Regina, have you taken over the slides, or?
No.
Oh, okay, because they're toggling back and forth for me, so I'm not sure. if anyone else is seeing that. Okay, so let's just jump right in. And I wanted to share just some definitions of negotiation that I had literally pulled off the internet. Okay, and actually as I found these in different ways to define negotiation, I just want to point something out. So I think these are widely accepted definitions. A process to resolve disputes, to agree upon courses of action, to bargain, to craft outcomes, usually regarded as a form of alternative dispute resolution intended to produce an agreement come to mutually approved upon terms. And so in all of these definitions of negotiation, you'll see that there's this issue of, well, I think one way and whoever I'm negotiating with thinks another way, and we need to come to some sort of agreement. Because if there was an agreement to begin with, there would be no negotiation, right? So there needs to be at some point some sort of disagreement, if you will, in order for us to then negotiate and then come to an agreement. Well, here's the thing. If you look at dispute resolution, or if you think about disagreement or conflict is another word that often is used when talking about negotiation, a lot of these have negative connotations. And so the first thing that I want to point out about negotiation is that it doesn't necessarily have to be negative. There's obviously some point of disagreement, like I mentioned, otherwise you would just agree and there would need to be no negotiation. So there needs to be some reason there is a back and forth. But that reason isn't necessarily a hostile reason. And in fact, if you think about, say, an offer negotiation, or if you think about a salary negotiation, actually there are more points of agreement than there are of disagreement. You and your employer want something to work out. That's the only reason why you would be sitting there negotiating, is because you want to work there or you want to stay there, and they want to keep you there or they want to get you there. And so the very first thing that I always remind people around negotiation is to just assume, actually, that there are more points of agreement, that it's a positive situation, and that it's not a conflict, it's not a dispute, and that you are going to come to terms. Okay, so let's talk about negotiation in your career. If you think about it, even in something as simple as job search, you're actually negotiating with a lot of people. You're negotiating with the person you might be working for at the prospective employer. You're negotiating with their HR folks. There might have been an external recruiter. Maybe there's a recruiting agency that sent you to this prospective employer, so they're going to be involved. You might be talking to other companies, and so even if you're not in the offer stage with those other companies, you're still talking to them, making sure that they speed up so that you have a chance to consider them against something that you might be looking at. You might be currently working, so you have your own employer to think about. And then, of course, there is your family, your friends, or whoever else is going to be involved in this decision. So if you think about just this one type of negotiation, your job offer negotiation, a lot of people are going to be involved. Secondly, there are going to be a lot of issues. So on the one hand, it's the things that we think about in terms of an offer, like your salary, and things like a bonus, whether it's a sign-on bonus or a year-end bonus or a profit share, and I put upside downside because sometimes you might have a bonus and they'll guarantee some of it. So there's a limited downside there. So there's some protection for you. Or sometimes there's an offer that comes with perhaps a guaranteed type of severance package if something should go wrong. So it's not just bonus in terms of extra money, but sometimes there's risk, downside protection as well. Then, of course, there are benefits. There are these non-cash things like medical insurance or dental or vacation or other things, paid time off, vacation, personal days, sick days, and the like. And then a couple of things that people don't necessarily think about for an offer negotiation but are super important are things like time. So you are negotiating for time to make a decision. So when do you need to hear my decision? And you're also negotiating for time to start, right? So you might get an offer, and let's say we're in the middle of November, and you might want to tie things up at your employer. You might want You might have a vacation that had already been planned for the holidays. You might not want to start till January 1st. They want to get you in there before the 1st. You negotiate on your start date. So you might be negotiating around time. The other thing is if you have other employers, prospective employers in play, you're negotiating around time there because you're saying to them, hey, I have this other offer. I'd really like to consider you. When will I know? So you're trying to push for time, with other folks, not just your prospective employer. And then finally, negotiating for information. So things like, well, you want me to decide on this offer. There's a bonus component to this offer. I'm going to need to know, what historically has the bonus been? They may or may not want to tell you that. Certainly you have to ask that and go back and forth. And so that's one example of negotiating for information. Another example is, again, if there are other employers possibly in play, you are negotiating with them to get your feedback, to get as close to an offer or whatever kind of in-depth feedback you can get so that maybe I should just forget about these other people and really look at this offer at hand, or it sounds promising, maybe I'll hold out and really try to postpone this offer so that I can bring other people in play. So you can see that it's not something as simple as, okay, it's a job search, so you must be negotiating an offer, and it must be just one or two things. There are a lot of things that you want to think about. So if you needed even more convincing that negotiation is important, let's forget about offer negotiation right now. Let's forget about salary negotiation. That is just one thing that you're negotiating against. You also might be negotiating for a promotion. So now for some people, a promotion, means a raise. That's why they want the promotion. But sometimes it doesn't come with a raise, so it is a separate issue, negotiating for a specific title. And the reason why that might be important to you is because with a title comes more authority, more influence. If you were to look for another job elsewhere, having a higher title could help you down the road. You might be negotiating for work-life flexibility, the ability to telecommute, the ability to work a specific schedule, maybe different start and end time, maybe a compressed schedule. So a lot of different things you'll be negotiating for. Goals and expectations. When you sit down for your year-end review, for those of you on this call who are employed and thinking about, the year-end means the holidays. The year-end for a lot of companies also means your performance review. And if your company doesn't have a process in place, you want to put a process in place, at least for yourself. You want to make sure that you're checking in with your boss and really understanding that you're doing the type of job that he or she is expecting. When I was in HR, and my background actually before starting my own company was that I spent 15 years as a management consultant, so seeing a lot of different companies and how they operate. And then I was an external recruiter. I was in retained search for a few years, and then I was in-house in corporate HR. And it was always amazing to me. I would have to navigate performance reviews between a manager and their team member, and I would have them list out what their three most important goals were. So the manager would have to say, okay, for my direct report, these are the three things they should be focusing on, and the direct report would have to say, okay, these are the three things I need to focus on. And they were never the same things. There was some overlap, but it was never an exact match. It's because people will go through their day-to-day and they will forget about what could be important. So goals and expectations, you want to check in with your employer about that. And then finally, relationships. That coworker that drops by your office to talk to you as you're pushing for a deadline or trying to push to get your stuff done so you can get out the door because you need to leave at 5 so you can relieve the babysitter and all of that kind of stuff. And that person meanders by and starts to talk to you, and you need to negotiate with them a new way to have a relationship because you might perfectly love to talk to them, just not now. So these are all things that you're negotiating for and has nothing to do with, a job search or just a career. Now, that's long-term stuff, but of course, there's the short-term stuff, right? So relationships again. So that coworker dropping by, okay, it's a long-term issue if this is someone that you're going to be seeing every day and that you need to be able to work with, but it's also a day-to-day issue because it impacts exactly what's going on in the moment. If you think about if any of you are working in a situation where your role might change, maybe you work in professional services where you're on different projects or you take on different clients, every time there's a change in your work project, you're negotiating a new role for yourself, what you're going to be taking on, what your deadlines are, what you have to deliver. So this is something you're negotiating day to day. If you need information from someone, if you need, say, financial statements so that you yourself can run your own analysis, you need to get that from people. You need to negotiate that from people sometimes because sometimes people are super busy and they think, well, I just can't get it to you, and you have to negotiate with them. And then finally, deadlines. You might be working on a number of different things, and then your boss comes by and says, I need this by tomorrow or by the end of this week, and he or she has already given you a number of things for tomorrow or for the end of the week, and you need to be able to negotiate in that moment. So it's long-term stuff and it's short-term stuff. So remember how I said there's a 3-part framework. So this is really important for people who feel like they freeze up in negotiations, right? So a lot of people feel like, I didn't say what I needed to say and the moment has gone, right? Well, actually, that's not true because there are always 3 steps to negotiation, and typically there are many more. So the first is the prior step. It's the before. It's everything that happens before that main conversation that we think of as the negotiation. And actually, when I share my 7 strategies, they are all around the preparation. Because I find with most of my clients, and I have had clients who have negotiated for, to keep off offers so that they can get the offer of their dreams, to get promoted, so different title, different type of role. I've worked with clients on negotiating an offer so that it is higher than what they were initially offered. They've negotiated raises, so they are within a company, but they are negotiating, double-digit raises when that's not typical of what's happening in this economy. So there are all sorts of negotiations that I've been involved with as a coach, and then also, of course, as a consultant and as an HR person, I've been on the opposite side of it, and I've negotiated with job seekers and with employees around their raises, promotions, offers, etc. So I've seen a lot of negotiations, and I've been in a lot of negotiations, and most people will succeed or fail on their negotiation based on what they do before any of the talking and the negotiating ever happens. So the 7 strategies are going to be around the preparation. So that's the first step, is you are preparing to ask for a raise, ask for a promotion, ask your colleague to stopping by unannounced. And then there's the actual negotiation that most people think of. It's that sitting down for the performance review, sitting down for the offer negotiation, pulling your colleague aside to ask about how you can have a better working relationship. So there is an actual conversation. And the operative words here to remember are to listen and adjust. So listening is going to be paramount as you get into the conversation, because all of the preparation that I'm going to talk about will only really help you if you're able to, in that moment that you are negotiating, listen to what the other person is saying so that you can actually respond in a genuine way. And then, which brings us to the response, right? The response isn't just what you do in the moment. So step 3 of every negotiation is what happens after that performance review, after that offer meeting, after that sit down with the colleague. After that happens, you want to have some sort of confirmation and response to whatever it is that you discussed. So the confirmation is typically in writing. It needs to be in writing so that you're on the same page. Could be an email. In the case of an offer, it would be an offer letter. It could be something that puts everything down so that you realize that in the heat of the moment you were listening appropriately and you understood everything that was agreed upon. And then the response could be if you promise to get back certain information, so maybe in an offer negotiation, for example, the employer or the prospective employer might say, well, what would you be expecting? What would you be expecting in terms of bonus structure or in terms of role and responsibility and all of that. And so you want to have a response for that, and you want to go back to that. So it's always 3 steps. It's not just in the moment. So if you are feeling like I freeze up when I'm in that moment of going back and forth, always recognize that there's going to be at least one more step, which is that confirmation and response. And if there is something that you hadn't thought of, you can bring it up at that time. There is always going to be another time. So let's talk about the 7 steps, and they're listed here in a nutshell, and I will go through each of them individually. So the first step is to build your case. So when you negotiate, it's not enough to want something. It's not even enough to think that you deserve something. Really what it comes down to when I say build your case is it needs to work for both of you. There needs to be something there that says, I deserve this, and not just because I think so. There needs to be some other objective reason why the person you're negotiating with, who I will call the counterparty, says yes. And so in a salary negotiation, that might be market data pointing to the fact that you're underpaid. It might be bottom line impact. You might be able to say, you know what, I brought in this big client, or I served this big client who would go elsewhere if it weren't for me, and this is what the impact is on this company, and I should be compensated for that, right? So there needs to be some sort of case. And then when you have that case, so then you're thinking to yourself, okay, it is going to be based on my bottom line impact or salary data in the market. You want to actually collect that data, right? So you might think it's true, but you really want to check that it's true. So just to continue the example of salary negotiation, you want to look at places that are similar to where you're negotiating. So if you're negotiating for a startup company, you want to look at startup salary data. You don't want to compare a Fortune 50 company with a mom and pop company. You don't want to compare companies outside of, industries, right? You don't want to compare a biotech company with a consumer products company. I once negotiated as the recruiter, so I was on the side of the employer, with an internal strategy consultant who was coming from consumer goods in the South to pharmaceutical in the Northeast. So his salary that he was negotiating from had nothing to do with the job he was going to. I knew that, the employer knew that, and thank goodness he knew that, because the employer offered him a raise, but it wasn't as much as he could have gotten had he just looked at pharma in the Northeast. And luckily for him, he had done his homework. He looked at geography, he looked at industry, and he said, look, this is a great offer. I'm so excited that you selected me, but from what I can gather from the market data, this is what the offer should be. And he ended up literally doubling his salary in that move because he was going to a higher paying industry, a higher paying geography, and he didn't just settle for being told no. So where can you get this market data? For salary, salary.com, Glassdoor, PayScale, GetRaised.com is relatively new. It's in the last couple years. It actually includes not only salary data, but scripts, negotiation scripts. It's written, created by a couple of behavioral scientists. One of them is now working for Microsoft on their Bing search engine. So he's a real talent, and it's a very good site. And the other thing about getting this market data is if the market data doesn't support your case. So let's say that you look around and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm fairly compensated, and I thought this whole time that I was underpaid. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't negotiate, that you just drop everything. There might still be another case that you can build, but wouldn't you rather know that going in rather than coming in and then having your boss actually pull out market data saying, I don't know why you're asking for that because all of our competitors pay similar to what we do. So you want to get that market data. You want to get what I call personal performance data. So there, of course, is what everybody else is doing, and then there's what you're doing. So this is about your contribution. So getting paid what other people are paid, that's one way to build a case. But another thing is just to say my contributions alone, again, because I'm servicing a client that brings in so much impact to this firm. There's a reason why you yourself should be paid even above average. And this is where you need to collect this proof. Okay? It's not just I feel like I'm doing a good job. It's because you have emails from colleagues that are telling you that you're doing a good job. It's because you can point to previous things that you've worked on and said, I contributed this, I contributed that, and you have, if not a paper trail, you've certainly walked through where all these ideas have come from. And you can really point to what that impact is. So revenues generated, costs saved, if you've improved a process, you need to apply some sort of value to it, because that value can then be translated into salary value. Don't assume that people know what your value is. Don't assume that just because you're working hard that people actually notice that. You have to tell people that. Otherwise, it's going to blend in to the rest of your job. Okay, so research what you're up against. And what I mean by this is, you're not going to just be saying a monologue. You're going to be talking to someone who's going to ask you questions and push back potentially, whether it's, hey, we just don't have the money, or it's, well, we never do raises outside of the regular performance review, so you're too late, or, whatever it is. You want to know, what am I up against here? What has happened in the past? Has anyone gotten a raise recently? Has anyone gotten a raise outside of the regular annual raise? How's the company doing? Are they going to throw back the company financials at me? You should know how your company's doing, by the way, regardless of whether you're asking for a raise, just for your own protection. But research, all of this so that you can start to play around with, well, what am I going to say if my boss says, well, the company's not doing well? Maybe you're going to say, but our department's doing well. The company as a whole might have not grown, but our division has been all the growth. We've grown 10%, and so I should be compensated according to that, right? So you want to have some time to really figure out what is your response going to be to potential conflicts. And then you also want to find out, when do these decisions actually get made? Because if budget is decided quarterly and they just decided it, you have this meeting and they've probably already parceled out all the money. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the meeting, but ideally you want to time your request for when budget and salary decisions are still being made. So you want to research some timing issues. Okay. You want to not just counter their objections. You also want to brainstorm what I call other positive outcomes. So sometimes they just don't have the money. What if you walk into a salary meeting and you realize, they've made all of these decisions based on the last quarter. They're not going to change anything for at least 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. They're not going to change anything. Does that mean that you just go away? Well, no, because there might be something else that you want instead of, or frankly, in addition to, right? So maybe they can't get you your full raise, but they can get you something, a spot bonus or something. What are some of the other positive outcomes? So one thing I point out is the spot bonus, which for those of you who don't know, a spot bonus it's on the spot. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a bonus that's just here. It's not a year-end bonus. It's not tied to a specific time, and it's not forever. It's a one-time thing. And the reason why I always remind my clients, if they're negotiating for money, to throw that in is because sometimes there's a different budget item for that. It's not taken out of salaries because salaries are forever and ever and increases are based on salaries, but a one-time bonus, there might be some extra cash for that. And I have actually won bonuses for my team. When I was in HR, I didn't just negotiate for myself. I was negotiating for my team, and all of the managers are jockeying to get their team members paid. I want to keep them happy, especially the ones that do a bang-up job. And there was one person who was clearly, underemployed. I mean, she was doing such a great job. She needed to get promoted, but there really wasn't anywhere for her to go. She actually had to leave the company, which was unfortunate, but we had a small HR team. But I wanted to keep her happy, and I wanted to recognize her performance. There was no way she was going to get a raise or a promotion, but I got her a spot bonus because that was something else. So it's something that you want to think about. Think about if not a raise altogether, which is cash in hand, maybe it can be a performance bonus, right? So maybe in one of these instances where, there's no money now, but there might be some money then, you can prolong the discussion by saying, okay, look, let's revisit this in 3 months. And if all these things are met, then we can talk about, a performance bonus or something like that. Maybe they'll pay for a class for you, or to send you to a conference, or to send you, for a degree or a certification. There might be something that you would have spent your money on that they can spend their money on. It comes out of a different budget for them, and it's just as meaningful for you. So just remember that you want to pick things that are meaningful for you. You don't want to negotiate for tuition reimbursement when you have no intention of going back to school, right? So the idea behind brainstorming additional outcomes and really being creative about this is because if you only have one outcome in mind, then the negotiation is yes or no. I'm getting this or I'm not getting this. Versus if there are a number of things that you would consider for yourself and that you could offer to whoever you're negotiating with, it becomes, let's look at all of these possibilities. Okay, so then finally, so we're close to, we're at step 6 at this point, increase your leverage. So leverage means, the easiest way to think about leverage is, this is your basically ability to say no, your ability to walk away, to negotiate hard because you have an ace up your sleeve. In an offer negotiation situation, that would be if you had another offer. The employer then knows, okay, this person really could walk away because they have something else to go to. So what I always tell people is that doesn't mean that you should get an offer just for the sake of going back to your current employer and throwing it in their face. I actually don't think that's all that helpful. But I do think, especially for women who are not used to advocating for themselves and really talking about their value, I think it is very helpful to see what you might command on the marketplace, to make sure that your professional network is intact, that your job search technique in terms of researching companies, interviewing, talking about yourself, that all of that is at its highest caliber at all times. That, even if you don't interview, that gives you leverage because then you know for sure. You say, you know what? If they say no and if this job becomes untenable, I can look for another job. I can do it quickly and I can do it productively, and that gives me confidence and that gives me leverage. Another example of leverage is savings. I actually think a strong personal finance foundation, which is why I love the work that Savvy Ladies does, a strong financial foundation is leverage to live your life, absolutely, because it enables you to take risks, to take a job that might be a stretch for you, to start your own business if you decide to start your own business, to have that conversation with your boss about pushing back on more responsibility for no more pay. All of that leverage comes, again, from having options, and one of those options is a financial cushion. So the final step in preparing is to actually run the dress rehearsal. No question, the biggest hurdle for folks is just getting those words out of their mouth. I recently coached a woman who was from investment banking, and she was a high-powered development executive in nonprofit. So this woman could talk money. There was no question she could talk money, and she had negotiated multi-million-dollar financial arrangements, no problem. When it came time for her, she was negotiating for a 50% raise, which was warranted based on the market data, based on her own personal performance, and based on the fact she was going to take on a big role. And so she thought this is going to be a piece of cake. And I said, listen, Jen, let's just run it, because The conversation is tomorrow. Let's run it, and you'll see. And she was like, okay. And so then I played the David, the hiring person, and I said, so Jen, what are you expecting in terms of compensation? And that was the uncomfortable silence, right? Did you think I accidentally muted myself? No, I didn't mute myself, but that was the silence that happened. And it was really, really difficult, actually, for her to start talking, even though she had negotiated far, far bigger deals for other people. When you are negotiating for yourself, it's always harder. So don't let the first time you're asking for your raise, asking for a promotion, whatever it is, don't let the first time be the actual negotiation. You want to role play asking for what you want, asking, building that case, battling the objections, have your friend role play what a logical person might say. You're asking for a 50% raise. Doesn't that seem aggressive to you? I actually said that to her because that's what the raise worked out to, and I wanted her to feel the nerves and the anxiety of being told no and having to push past that. And so you really want to role play this. I cannot stress this enough. Dress yourself up, go into a conference room, do whatever it is that you want to do to make this as real for you as possible. I'm a classical pianist by training, and there's a reason why, if any of you are musicians or are athletes, you know this, that you always will run a dress rehearsal, or if you're a marathon runner, you'll drive the course of the race. You always prepare in advance. So how can you take all of this data, and thankfully there's a recording so you can go back and you can replay things, but how can you practice on your own if there isn't a negotiation happening? Well, one of the things that really scares people is asking, is making demands. So you want to practice doing that in lower risk frameworks. Go to your local flea market and ask for a lower price on something you don't even want to buy. Just get used to doing that. Because I'm telling you to build a business case and to really try to put yourself in the shoes of your counterparties, you can come up with an objective reason. Practice doing that for any business case. Like, read an article in the paper and lay out for yourself, what the business case is. So if you're reading about something happening in the economy, well, how is this going to impact that? Or read your annual report for your own company or recent memos and walk yourself through, well, how does this impact that? You really want to understand the language of business. And then you also want to understand the language of pros and cons, right? So again, take an article out of the paper that has two different sides to things. So it could be a political argument. It could be, like a new public project that's being built. How do you feel about it? What would be the other side? You want to practice really being able to jump around and understand both sides, because this is part of listening and adjusting during the negotiation. And then finally, you're going to have nerves and anxiety when you get into the negotiation. So you really want to know for yourself before you get into that situation how you relax yourself. You want to have some kind of routine and some kind of techniques. And just think back to when you've done a presentation, or when you've taken a final exam, or when you've had a specifically or particularly stressful time in your life. Think back to how you relaxed yourself, how you got back in the game, and use that. Remind yourself of the things that you did, so that when you feel that in your own negotiation, in your next negotiation, you'll know how to overcome that. So with that, I'm going to jump into the chat, and this is my information so that you can follow along. I have a lot of information on negotiation on my site, and in fact, on the homepage, the video, it's a two-part video. So one of it is my business partner, Connie, interviewing Dick Vitale on motivation, and then the other is a CBS segment that I taped on women in negotiation specifically. So that is one resource that's out there. If you go to the blog and just type in negotiation, you will see some information there. So with that, I will jump to questions. And Regina, I don't see, I think, all of the things in the chat, so you're going to have to, I guess, read it to me, right, if there are questions. So Regina, should I just jump into the things that are posted on the chat now? And I'm not going to wait for you to jump in because I see I ask 1,000 questions. Yeah,
I'm
Regina,
sorry.
did you want to?
Sure. I'm sorry. I thought you. I was unmuted there. Yes, I think there were a few questions that came up during the session, and I think there's a couple really important ones because there's a lot of people going through transition right now. A lot of people that were making six figures aren't making the same amount. And the question that came up first was, how do you begin to start the negotiation when you really are in need of income and you're afraid to lose the opportunity?
Okay, so great question. And here's the thing, that when you get to that stage where you're in the offer negotiation, remember, there are more points of agreement than disagreement. They want you. The employer wants you. Okay, that doesn't mean that you can be a jerk about things and push back about everything, but it does mean that you should feel confident at this point that they are not just going to walk away because you ask for more. I think that's the biggest hidden fear, that somehow you're going to question the salary and then they're just going to say, well, then forget it. We're going to go with our candidate number 2. That never happens. Okay, I've never, ever, I've 15 years, thousands of negotiations, I've never seen that. So I'm just going to just tell you that right now. What you do is you thank them profusely for the offer because you're super excited about the offer. You want to really remind them that you're both excited. I'm super excited about this. I can't wait for us to get started. We're going to do amazing things together. I have a question about the compensation. How did you come up with that salary? So a lot of your opening question will depend on what your business case is. So if you've already done your homework and the salary that they're quoting you is really way off, right, don't look at that as the employer is trying to lowball you. They might not know, and they might be super grateful that you've got this data from Glassdoor, Get Raised, or whatever it is that you get, that says, I've seen things in the 50 to 60 range or the 100 to 200. I mean, I've seen, I've negotiated 7-figure, compensations. So listen, at every price point from 5 to 7 figures, really just asking them, how did you arrive at that number, diffuses the pressure around accusing them of lowballing or whatever. So it's a curiosity. Think curiosity. How did you get that? And really work from there, because what you're trying to understand is, how did they get that? What were they thinking? What are their constraints? And make sure, by the way, that at this point, this is why it's all won and lost in the preparation, that you also know what it is that you want. I often find that people are nervous about pushing back to employers because they themselves are just not sure about what the compensation should be. They were somehow expecting more, but they don't base that on anything. So listen, you're not going to lose the offer just because you ask. I am currently interested in a more flexible work environment, but unsure how to bring this up. Specifically, at what point in the negotiations I'm going to take a lower base for the same job if I could work from home. Okay, so this one's super tricky because it's what I call a hyper-local question. This is really going to be based employer by employer, role by role, because flexible work assignments, it's very rare that type of policy is company-wide and hits everyone. More typically, it's a case-by-case basis. And so you really can't point to something and say, well, because the market says this is what we're going to be doing here, because there is no market. I mean, you can point anecdotally to examples, and you should have these in your back pocket. But what I would say is, at what point in the negotiation, you always negotiate when they have fallen in love with you. So the negotiation never starts unless you are absolutely positively clear that they are interested in you. And even then, if there is no offer specifically put on the table, I would not be negotiating specific terms. What I would be doing in the interview and in the questions that you ask and in the way that you answer questions is that I would be establishing exactly what their expectations are. I would be conducting my due diligence around, does anyone work from home? Does anyone work flexibly? Could I do this job in the manner that I want to do it? So it's not about I want to work from home. It's about, okay, you want X, Y, Z done. I can get X, Y, Z done, and this is how it's going to happen, and that how it's going to happen happens to include you working at home, okay? And so you're building that case, but I wouldn't reveal that case until you get the go-ahead, the green light that says, we want to bring you on board. Like, how can we make this happen? So that's the dance that you have to do with negotiation. I mean, it starts in a sense before an offer is given, because you have to establish your value. You have to establish that you're good enough that they will bend over backwards for you, whether that means flexibility or a higher than average compensation or a whatever. So you're establishing that, but you don't talk about specific terms until you know that they are definitely interested.
Okay, so Caroline, we have another one that came up here. Is they've been out of work. So how do you basically negotiate reentry to a job market after being out a year? And then the second part to that question is, should you accept below your previous job?
Okay, so should you accept a lower salary than your previous job? There are many reasons why you should. I mean, sometimes you need to have some money coming in to take care of that financial foundation, which gives you leverage, confidence, ability to take risks, etc. So I don't know what your financial situation is, but there are many good reasons to start earning an income. And if you need it in terms of survival, then absolutely you want to get there. The other reason why you want to start earning money is also because sometimes people don't value what other people don't pay for. So if all of this time you've been volunteering or pro bono consulting, if you want to call it that, or whatever, some people will always look at that as a secondary thing, a hobby, a passion, and they won't value it because there is no price tag attached to it. When you are not working for money, your effective past salary, your most recent salary, is zero. Regardless of how you want to couch it and say, well, but a year ago I was earning six figures. Yes, but right now you're earning zero. And the thing is that past salary is a very strong anchor in the minds of prospective employers, meaning that that's what they're going to see, and they're going to see everything, $1, as an improvement to the zero. So that's another reason why, you want to get a dollar figure in there. It's always easier to go up from a low amount than it is to go up from zero. That being said, let's just take that off the table and say, well, I'm negotiating from zero because I haven't worked in a year. Okay, that's fine. That's still doable. What that means is that you have to change the anchor for the prospective employer from zero to something else. And that something else is not going to be your salary from a year ago. That could be a data point. It is more likely going to be, more effectively, it's going to be what the market will bear right now, and also what specific value you are going to bring into the position. So the person that I mentioned, Jen, who was having trouble negotiating even though she did deals for other people, she was actually stepping into a role where arguably they could have paid her less because there was market data that supported the salary she asked for, but there was definitely market data that supported a lower salary. They could definitely have pulled that card. But the reason why they didn't, and she didn't let them, is because there was a unique set of circumstances. They needed to get something done, and she was uniquely positioned to do that, and they had a deadline. And so she was like, listen, you have to pay for that. If you want me here right now, focused on this, you have to pay for that. And that's what is going to be effective if you're negotiating from zero, is really understanding what the employer needs right now and saying, I'm basically the solution to that problem. And they're going to pay for that because for them, it's like, I want to get rid of this problem. So they're going to pay for that. And that's a lot easier to make a case for that than it is to say, hey, you need to pay me X amount just because I used to make that before. That doesn't hold in a marketplace like today where, let's face it, the economy is in a recession. That's not a secret to anybody. I have seen salary compression, so salaries have dipped, but not for the best performers who can make a value for their case.
Great. I think there's a few questions that came directly to me. So we've got about 3 more questions I think that we have time for. So the first one is, I'm aware that I'm expecting to manage people who are technically making more money than me. Is it worth addressing to negotiate a higher rate of compensation?
Well, but it depends on the situation. There are going to be a lot of situations where people are managing people who make more. Sales is one very common one. But if you just think of teams, right? Sports teams where the manager is not the highest paid person on that team, right? And so this gets back to what I had said before about you really want to be compensated on your value. So you never want to go in there and say, well, these other people are making more, ergo I need to make more, because that just doesn't make any sense. They're not doing the same job that you're doing. There are many other examples of rank and file. They're going to make more than the manager depending on what the situation is. So you need to go in there and advocate for a higher salary if you are bringing something to the table, perhaps that you're able to keep rock star producers in line, that you're able to manage diva-sized egos, that they will work for you in a way that they won't work for other people. I mean, that's probably your strongest argument than pointing to salary discrepancy because it's meaningless. So you got to know what your case is, right? Build the case. You want a case that makes sense.
So along with the build the case, the next question is, how do you frame your work success when your resume shows many short-term contracts?
Well, so duration doesn't equate impact, right? So if you're somewhere in 3 months and you got yourself a sizable result, that's what you want to talk about. So this is another reason why when you're preparing really your interview responses, your networking pitch, all of that, most people, they'll just go chronologically. Well, I was here, then I was here, then I was here, and it's like a story that unfolds, back to front. That's not useful, and that's not necessarily what highlights you in the best light. You want to actually focus on what you've accomplished, and if that means that you spotlight a 3-month assignment over a 3-year assignment because it's this big, juicy turnaround situation that you worked on to great impact, then that's what you do. People are not going to be looking at you and looking down at your resume and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is 3 months and that was 3 years. Trust me, they won't. They don't read resumes.
So I think this last one is a combination, but it says, I used to be a shark, but after being unfairly fired from a top-tier position, I sued and won the lawsuit, but still was blackballed. Then finding out my husband lost nearly $1 million in stock market. We're not spring chickens. Find myself self-esteem shot and finding hard to stand in my power. So with that note, I think everyone can relate to that in many different scenarios. It's really, we're getting older, and we also talk about confidence. So how would you address that?
Yeah, so I would, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, my biggest contribution sometimes is that I see all of the good things that for some reason they don't see. That when I help them craft a networking pitch or a negotiation case or whatever, they're always like, wow, you make me sound so much better than I am. And I have to remind them, it's like I've only known you for a few hours, right? And based on what you've written to me, and sometimes I've never even met these people face to face if they're not in New York City where I'm based. And so it's like, how is it possible that I can make you better than you are? I'm just working off of the things that are already here. And so with that, I would say, get one of your friends who knows you and who's always been a champion, not one of your pity party friends, or we all have people who are kind of, frenemies in that way where they put us down sometimes. So not one of those, but one of the cheerleader ones, one of the ones that has always believed in you. And And just ask them to remind you why they like you so much, why they admire you, and force yourself to listen. Like, really don't interject and don't say, no, 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 oh, you don't mean that, like that type of thing, but really, like, listen to that. And remind yourself about all of the things that you do have. Go line by line through your resume, and it might not be the most recent stuff, but there is stuff in there, I'm sure, that is super, super impressive. And just allow yourself to bathe really in that success, and not overthink it. I wrote a piece for Forbes, and I think if you remind me, Regina, I'll email it to you, where it says, if it doesn't feel like bragging, you're probably underselling yourself. Where I talk about this thing with women is that it's going to feel uncomfortable because we're so not used to doing it. But don't get used to it. Like, I'm sure everybody on this call has done amazing things. And find a friend to remind you, or try to remind yourself by going through your resume. But allow yourself to feel really good about it, and then that's it. And then go from there.
That's fantastic. Is there one last thing that you would suggest everyone that's on this call today? Because you're right. I think people have done amazing things, and we always are a little bit more self-critic than we want to be. What would you say is a takeaway for them to jumpstart themselves?
Well, I think if you remember anything, it's that negotiation is a 3-step framework at the very least. It's not just one point in time. So for everybody on this call, you might rue the day that you quit a job prematurely, or you might feel like you let your job search go on too long, or you didn't negotiate from the get-go, or whatever happened. That's in the past, and we can always move from there. And I've seen people double-digit increases, double their salary. It is possible even in this market. And so don't let anyone scare you with market statistics or historical statistics. I always tell people unemployment statistics are always wrong. They are 0 or 100%, frankly, for you. You either are employed or you're not. You either love your job or you're not, and you can always start from where you are.
Well, we thank you very much, Caroline, for coming on. It's been fantastic, and I think we have some really great tips here and something to take us and really empower ourselves going forward. So thank you very much again.
Thanks, Regina.
All right, everyone, thank you very much for attending, and tune in to our next webinar and seminar, and don't forget our hotline on December 2nd. Take care and have a great day.